Hi everyone, we're on a new book today. We've got a new book by Philip Pullman. It's The Adventures of the New Cut Gang. Now this book has 2 stories in it. So we're going to start off with the first story in this, and it's called Thunderbolt's Waxwork. Okay. So chapter 1, Dippy's Ambition. Lambeth, 1894. The criminal career of Thunderbolt Dobney began on a foggy November evening outside the Waxwork Museum. Thunderbolt had never thought of himself as a criminal. He was a mild and scholarly youth, but he was a passionate collector of curiosities, and for some days now he had been filled with a desire for the odd-shaped lump of lead belonging to Harry Fitchett, a boy in his class. Finally, after much bargaining, he had persuaded Harry to swap it for a length of catapult rubber. The exchange took place under a hissing gaslight by the Waxworks entrance. "This is stolen property, this lead," said Harry. "It came off that statue of King Neptune outside the Lamb and Flag, you remember?" The knowledge that he was holding a piece of criminal history added to Thunderbolt's pride. Harry ran off, twanging his length of rubber band at the legs of passers-by, and Thunderbolt dropped the lead into his pocket with a guilty thrill. The others, meanwhile, were gazing up at the posters advertising the latest attractions at the Waxworks. "A victim of the atrocious death of 1,000 cuts," said Benny Kaminsky. Benny was a stocky, dark-haired boy of 11. When you saw Benny at first, you took him for an ordinary boy. When you'd known him for half an hour, you were convinced he was a genius. When you'd known him for a day, you suspected he was the devil. But by then, it was too late. You were drawn in. Everyone who knew Benny was drawn in because he was less like a boy than a whirlpool. The new gang were proud to follow him. Thunderbolt peered at the poster Benny was looking at. "Ah, I read about that in the encyclopedia," he said. "What they do is they tie him up and slice off the bits of them with a razor. They start at the feet and work their way up. Takes hours," he added enthusiastically, pushing his glasses up with a grimy finger. "Well," said Bridie, "are we going in or not?" Bridie Malone was red-haired and red-tempered, and at least as fierce as Benny. Everywhere that Bridie went, her little brother, Sharky Bob, came too. He was a placid and benevolent child who would eat anything, and often did. The others didn't mind having Sharky about because they'd often won bets on his ability to chew up and swallow dog biscuits, champagne corks, fish heads, and anything else the sporting citizens of Lambeth offered him. He was plucking at Bridie's sleeve now. "Dippy's selling chestnuts," he said. "I seen him just now. I likes chestnuts," he added helpfully. So did they all. The death of 1,000 cuts forgotten, they streamed across the road and around the corner to Rummage's Emporium, where Dippy had set up his hot chestnut stand. Rummage's Emporium took up several shop fronts. It was the biggest store in Lambeth, and the windows were blazing with light and streaming with condensation. Old Dippy was selling some chestnuts to a customer who'd just come out, and he greeted the children cheerfully. "3 penn'orth, please, Dippy," said Benny. He had earned a shilling earlier that day by holding some horses for the Peretti brothers, removals, funerals, and seaside excursions. "You get 16 chestnuts for a penny, so that would mean 12 each." The kids stood around Dippy's little stove to eat them, fishing the smoking nuts out of the triangular twists of paper and rolling them between their palms to loosen the skin. "You been to the Waxworks then?" said Dippy. "I'd like to be a waxwork." "They don't make waxworks of hot chestnut men," said Thunderbolt. "Only kings and criminals and people like that." "I used to be a criminal," said Dippy. "I set out to be a pickpocket, but I had to give it up on account of me conscience." "Unless you're a celebrated murderer, it's not worth mentioning crime," said Benny. "Ain't you done anything else to make you famous, Dippy?" Dippy rubbed his bristly jaw. "No," he said mournfully, "but I'd love to be a waxwork. Make me feel me life had been worthwhile somehow." Another customer came out of rummages and bought a pennyworth of chestnuts, paying with a sixpence. Bridie was interested in this waxwork talk, but even more interested in the nearest window, where a stout and shiny man called Mr Paget, the gentleman's outfitting manager, was clambering about arranging a mannequin. Every time he lifted the arm into position and turned around to pick up some gloves from behind him, the arm fell down again. He got more and more vexed and more shiny. The arm came up, the arm fell down. He dropped the gloves. The dummy swung forward and butted him on the nose. He said, very visibly, a wicked word, and looked guiltily out at the pair of wide blue eyes watching him. Bridie turned at once to a kindly old gentleman passing by and asked him what the word meant, pointing in at Mr Paget. "No, no!" Mr Paget mouthed in horror and waved his hands, but then had to lurch sideways to catch the dummy and knocked over a chair, which was the point when Mr Rummage stormed out of the main entrance. "Get away from that window," he bellowed, shaking his fist. "I'll not have vagrants and costermongers on my property. I'll have the law on you, smoking up my windows and leaving your filthy rubbish on the pavement. Get away, go on. Sling it, the pair of you." Dippy didn't want to move, because standing in the bright light of the window among the crowds going in and out of the shop was good for business. But Mr Rummage was a roaring, red-faced bully, and no one could stand up to his shouting for long. So the gang helped Dippy to move and set up a little further away, and Mr Rummage scowled and strutted back inside. "Great bellowing bag of wind," said Bridie. "I'd like to get me revenge on him," scowled Benny. The gang had taken a dim view of Mr Rummage since the time he'd run them out of the shop for offering to demonstrate the camping equipment. It was Benny's idea. They'd offered to pitch a tent inside the store and cook meals on a Vesuvius patent folding stove and filter water with an anti-buggo microbial filter and sleep in the comfy snooze patent sleeping valise. And they'd even put on a display of Apache war dancing to entertain the customers. Benny was very proud of his plan. In the way of his plans, this one had soon spun out of control. He imagined a corps of demonstrators, highly skilled and efficiently trained kids, say about 10,000 of them to start with, who'd be paid by grateful shopkeepers throughout the kingdom to show customers how to use the goods on sale. Benny would take a small percentage, say about 75%, and within a year he'd be rich. Have branches in America, float the company on the stock exchange, stand for parliament, etc, etc. Anyway, he was explaining to Mr Rummage how useful it would be when Thunderbolt had that accident with the luxuriosum folding umbrella tent, and then the Pretty twins got carried away with the Pegasus self-propelled invalid chair, and Sharky Bob discovered the surprise officer's dried food ration tin, and things got out of control. Mr Rummage had thrown them all out bodily and forbidden them to enter the store ever again. "Here, Dippy," said Benny. "Where's me change?" "Oh, sorry," said Dippy. "You give me a shilling, didn't you? Here's a threepenny bit and a nice new tanner." Benny took it, but looked at it oddly and then bit it. "Here, Dippy," he said. "This is snide, this is. Where'd you get it from?" He held it out. It was new and shiny. There was Queen Victoria and all the letters around the edge, and there was a tooth mark right across Her Majesty's nose. "It's snide, all right," said Bridie. "Look, Dippy, it ain't a proper sixpence at all." They all crowded close. Dippy took the coin and tested it with his 4 remaining teeth. "Yeah, I reckon you're right," he said, baffled. "It's a fake and no error. Well, who passed that on to me?" "Here, you better have some proper money." He didn't have another sixpence, so he gave Benny 6 ordinary pennies and looked at the snide sixpence with disgust. Thunderbolt could see something else in his expression too. A sixpence was a lot of money when you only made 2 or 3 shillings a day. But then an old lady came along and bought some chestnuts for her granddaughter, and then Johnny Hopkins came out of the Welsh Harp wiping his whiskers and bought some too, and the gang said goodbye to Dippy and then wandered off. "It's not fair," Bridie said when they reached the Waxworks. "Whoever gave Dippy that snide sixpence knew they were cheating." "It's not fair not letting him be a waxwork either," Benny said. "All them waxworks in the museum, all they'd done was murder people and discover America and be kings and queens and that. Where's the justice in that? I bet if Dippy was a victim of the death of 1,000 cuts, they'd put him in all right." "There's not enough of Dippy to make 1,000 bits," said Bridie. Benny scowled at the closed door of the Waxworks Museum. "We'll get Dippy in there if it's the last thing we do," he said. When Benny's expression was set like that, the rest of the gang knew better than to argue with him. The others left him there, frowning Napoleonically, and walked home towards Clayton Terrace. "I wouldn't mind putting one over that professor who owns the Waxworks," said Bridie. "He slung me and Sharky out last July." "I bet I can guess why," said Thunderbolt. "Well, it was only a little finger off one of the blokes being tortured in the Chamber of Horrors, and he'd lost a lot more than that already. You'd hardly notice." "What did it taste like, Sharky?" "Nice," said Sharky Bob stolidly. "And the professor made us pay for it. I had a threepenny bit, and he took it all. I bet that's enough for a whole arm." They walked on through the gathering mist, which was making the gaslights look like dandelion heads. "I hope Dippy doesn't get another snide sixpence," said Thunderbolt. "Ma got one in the butcher's yesterday," said Bridie. "You should have heard her cursing. Hey, is that your pa down there?" They were outside number 15, where Thunderbolt and Pa lived on the ground floor, and Bridie and the rest of her large family lived upstairs. Bridie was peering down into the area, the little space in front of the basement window where an eerie glow was flickering through the grimy window onto the damp bricks. "Yeah," said Thunderbolt. "He's making something new. I don't know what it is, because it's a trade secret." Mr Dobney was in the novelty and fancy gifts trade. He made candlesticks that looked like dragon's pipes, pipe cleaner dispensers that looked like dog kennels, soda water bottle holders that swiveled round on a turntable, and all kinds of ingenious inventions and devices. His latest line was a combined glove holder and dog whistle, but for some reason there was no demand for them, and they hadn't sold at all. So he'd rented the basement specially and started making a new line. Only Thunderbolt was allowed to know what it was. All he did know was that it involved electricity. Pa had lugged a lot of heavy batteries and coils of wire down there, and occasional flashes and electrical humming sounds came out from behind the closed door. "I better get in," said Thunderbolt. "Put his tea on." "Oh, I likes tea," said Sharky Bob. "I likes biscuits and all." "Yeah, Sharky, we know," Bridie said. "What you got for your tea then?" "A couple of herrings," said Thunderbolt. "How are you going to cook 'em?" "Dunno, boil 'em, I suppose. They're only a kind of a kipper. You boil kippers." Bridie shook her head in exasperation. "I better show you." Thunderbolt had been looking after his pa for nearly a year now, and Mr Dobney had never complained yet. Thunderbolt felt a bit put out by Bridie's contempt for his cooking, but he let her storm into the kitchen and bang about till she found the frying pan. She was about to put it on the range when she recoiled and held it under the lamplight to look more closely. "What in the world have you been cooking in this?" she said, picking disgustingly at some tar-like substance on the bottom. "Toffee, I think," said Thunderbolt, trying to remember. That was when Pa thought of going into the toffee apple trade, and he was trying to find a cheap way of making toffee. He used fish oil instead of butter, only it didn't set properly. Bridie put down the frying pan and found a skillet. "This'll do," she said. "Give us the herrings and a knife and find me some salt." She slid the knife deftly up and down and scraped out some fascinating strings and blobs of fish innards. Sharky Bob stopped licking the frying pan and reached for them automatically, and she slapped his hand away. "Right now, what you do is make the skillet hot, scat it with a big spoon of salt and lay the fishes on it. They're oily enough to sizzle by themselves without any grease. What are you reading? She laid the herrings where Sharky couldn't reach them, tucked a strand of curly red hair beneath her ear and peered at the open books on the table. Me homework, Thunderbolt exclaimed. We got to copy out and learn 10 words out of the dictionary, together with what they mean. Aardvark, read Bridie. Edentate insectivorous quadruped. Well, that's helpful, I'm sure. Ambergris, fatty substance of marmoriform or striated appearance exuded from the intestines of the sperm whale and highly esteemed by perfumers. Yuck! Asbestos, a fine fibrous amphibole of crystal tile capable of incombustibility. What in the world does that all mean? Oh, we don't have to know what it means, only what it says. And that's what you get up to in school. Catch me going, said Bridie, removing the frying pan from Sharky Bob. Come on, Shark, time to go. Bye, Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt said goodbye, stirred up the fire and put another few lumps of coal on it, brought the lamp to the table and sat down to finish his homework. Hello, son, said Mr. Dobney, coming in after a few minutes. Oh, blooming cold down there. Oh, what's for tea? He rubbed his hands and held them out to the fire. Herrings, said Thunderbolt. I never knew they had giblets in them, like chickens do. Bridie took them out and showed me how to cook them proper. They'll taste all right this time. Tastes all right to me last time, said Mr. Dobney, sitting in the rocking chair and unfolding the paper. Thunderbolt loved his pa, and he knew his pa loved him, but neither of them would have dreamed of saying so. Instead, Mr. Dobney was always nice about his son's cooking, and Thunderbolt always thought his father's latest invention would be the best of all. And there was nothing nicer than sitting by the fire of an evening with the kettle simmering and the brass Buddha gleaming on the mantel shelf, and Mr. Dobney reading Scandal out of the paper while Thunderbolt arranged his museum. So you've cleaned the old frying pan then, said Mr. Dobney. What have you got there? It's a bit of lead, said Thunderbolt. It came off that statue of King Neptune outside the Lamb flag. You remember. He took down the little brass-bound chest that belonged to his Uncle Sam the sailor, and which contained all the treasures of his museum. The walrus tooth, engraved with a picture of the Cutty Sark, in little scratchy black lines, a dried seahorse, several cowrie shells, a genuine bone from the nose of a cannibal chief, which Uncle Sam had won from him in a poker game, a lump of rubbery stuff from Sargasso Sea, which Thunderbolt thought was probably dried jellyfish. And then there were Thunderbolt's own discoveries, a halfpenny, which had been run over by a tram, a twig off one of the bushes in Battersea Park, which if you held it the right way and squinted a bit, it looked exactly like a little old man. A broken glass slide from a magic lantern showing Glamis Castle with what Thunderbolt knew was a ghost at one of the windows, and 46 bits of old-fashioned clay pipe from the Thames mud. When they broke a clay pipe in the olden days, when they used to smoke clay pipes, there was nothing to do with it but throw it away, and most of them ended up in the river. He laid them all out on the table and noticed that he'd spelled Sargasco wrongly on the card that belonged to the dried jellyfish. He rewrote it carefully and scraped a bit of fluff off the lump, which was looking fairly battered. It was a dull colour, sort of grey really, with sooty streaks. Some of it came off under his fingernail. He looked at it dubiously. What's that? Said Pa. That's old Sam's petroleum wax in it. I thought it was a dried jellyfish, said Thunderbolt. No, son. That's petroleum wax. You got it from Trinidad. They have this blooming great lake there made of tar. You can walk on it. Here. That's a thought. Shoes with soles made of tar. They'd be waterproof, wouldn't they? I have to look into that. No, that's wax. That is wax. Wax, Dippy? The Waxworks? The Thunderbolt jumped up excitedly. Pa looked across the top of his paper in mild astonishment, and Thunderbolt explained about Dippy's ambition. I get it, said Pa, rolling the heavy lump towards him. Make a nice head, this would. Funny colour, mine. Still, Dippy's not a healthy colour himself. We could make a body for it and smuggle it in. Dippy Hitchcock, world-famous hot chestnut man. Pity he's not a murderer, really. You're getting easy, then. You won't have to smuggle the whole thing in, said Pa. Just the head. You can't just be a head. Dippy Hitchcock, the famous hot chestnut disembodied head. No, just whip the bonds off Charles II or Admiral Nelson or someone and bung Dippy's nut there instead. Thunderbolt felt doubtful. I don't know. I think he ought to be himself, not masquerading as someone else. Wouldn't be the same somehow. He rolled the petroleum wax towards him. There must have been 4 pounds of it, maybe 5. Then he saw the newspaper, which Pa had picked up again, and read a little headline off the back. Fraudulent utterance of forged coins. What's that, Pa? That story there. Oh, that? Nothing. A lot of fuss about nothing. Come on, Samuel. Put your stuff away. It's nearly bedtime. His pa had never called him Thunderbolt. In fact, he'd only been Thunderbolt since the summer, when he'd knocked out Crusher Watkins from the Lower Marsh gang. Crusher had said something about Thunderbolt's ma, and Thunderbolt had flown at him with one colossal boat that knocked him out cold. A thunderbolt. Ever since then, he'd lived in mortal dread of meeting Crusher again. But it had been worth it. That's the end of chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Tune in for the next chapter. Bye now.